our esteemed guests this evening, I'd like to acknowledge that the land that PNCA resides on, in the center of Multnomah County, are the ancestral homelands of the Multnomah, the Klamath, Clackamas, Tumwater, Chinook, and many other indigenous nations of the Columbia River Basin. It is important to acknowledge the ancestors of this place and to recognize that we are here because of sacrifices that were forced upon them. And as settlers and guests on these lands, we respect the work of Native nations, leaders, and families, and make ongoing efforts to center indigenous knowledge, creativity, resilience, and resistance. Words are important, and it's why we say these words at the beginning of all of our public lectures through the Hallie Ford School of Graduate Studies. Words bear witness, they pay homage, and they remind us of work that is yet to be done. This evening's lecture is hosted by the Collaborative Design and Design Systems graduate programs as part of Hallie Ford School of Graduate Studies. And it is my great pleasure to introduce this evening's guests, Dr. Lesley and Noel. Dr. Noel is from Trinidad and Tobago and has degrees in industrial design from the Universidade Federal de Paraná in Brazil, a master's degree in business administration from the University of West Indies in Trinidad and Tobago, and her PhD in design from North Carolina State University. Dr. Noel practices design through emancipatory, critical, and anti-hegemonic lenses, focusing on equity, social justice, and the experiences of people who are often excluded from design research. Dr. Noel is Associate Director of Design Thinking and Social Impact and Professor of Practice at the Phyllis M. Taylor Center for Social Innovation and Design Thinking at Tulane University. Her research highlights the work of designers outside of Europe and North America as an act of decolonizing design. She attempts to promote greater critical awareness among designers and design students by introducing critical theories, critical concepts, and vocabulary into the design studio. For example, through her design critical alphabet. Earlier this year, our students in the Collaborative Design and the Design Systems program had the opportunity to engage in the Restorative Design Conference, which is for many of our students and our faculty, one of the first opportunities where we've heard Dr. Noel present. So we've been very excited that she is here with us this evening. And so without greater ado, I would like to welcome our guest this evening, Dr. Lesley and Noel. Thank you.
Thank you so much, MK. That is such a warm welcome. I didn't know you had been to the Restorative Design Conference, so I should let George A. and the folks at Greater Good Studios know that they made some great connections for your students, and through them we've been able to connect, and that's great. I wanted to chat just a little bit before I started sharing my screen so that, because the screen takes over everything afterwards, but I'm really, really thankful for the invitation. And I have a presentation, and I'm hoping that people will also, feel comfortable enough to put some things in the chat, to ask other questions. I'm a bit of a storyteller, so some of the stories people might have heard before, and some of them might be new, but I'm hoping that people will be willing to share this conversation in this time that we're going to spend together. So I'm going to go into my share screen. All right, I think you should be seeing me okay. So I decided to call this, like I do my talks in like little series, and this series of talks that I've been doing for the last maybe just like few weeks, I've been calling these teaching and learning design through a critical lens, which is actually almost the name of my PhD thesis, because finally, I mean, it's not like I've had a PhD for that long, but, you know, like finally a couple years afterwards, I'm able to say, well, okay, this actually is then the lens that I'm interested in. You know, everything that I do is through this critical lens, and I'm bringing it to everything. So this is what my talk is called and what it's about. So we're going to spend an hour together. I have a bit of a script, and every now and again I'll go off script, right? But I've decided to break up the talk into some distinct sections. So one about my positionality, another one about the PhD research, something about classes that I've taught, like kind of experimental classes that I've taught, and then finally some passion projects that I run or I do. So everything that I do, I like to talk about positionality because I think that it grounds, we carry our positionality with us everywhere. And so the first chapter, I suppose we could say, of my talk, we could call it my origin story. You know, why do I think I need to talk about pluriversality or critical design, or, you know, why am I talking about this stuff, right? So I'll give you a little bit of an insight into my world. I'm from the Caribbean. I'm from Trinidad and Tobago. And MK, it was so nice to hear you say Tobago. A lot of people say Tobago, but yeah, I'm from Trinidad and Tobago. And I'm from this tiny, tiny, tiny island that barely appears on the map, right? So this is a card that I bring in. This is one of my cards from the critical alphabet that talks about what is positionality. So positionality is the practice of a researcher delineating their own position in relation to research context. So, you know, like we're saying who we are and then how we show up in the work that we do. So I show up in the work that I do as a Black woman from the Caribbean. And it actually doesn't really matter what I'm doing. I'll probably come in with that identity. I have other identities as well, but then that's, I carry these identities with me, right? So here's a tiny glimpse. Well, here's the section of the world that I consider to be very important. Where I'm from does not show up on the map. It's completely covered by the Google pin. I'm from Trinidad and Tobago, which is just north of Venezuela and north of, just above South America. But there's another element of my positionality that I carry everywhere. I spent several years in Brazil, between two cities in Salvador Bahia and in Curitiba in the south of Brazil. So that's where I did undergrad. So that appears surprisingly a lot. Well, it was 6 years, and it appears a lot in the work that I do because of the time of my life that I went to Brazil. My mother's from Jamaica, so that's another spot here. I've done work in East Africa, and then later on in life, I was already a professional, you know, already had been working for about 15 years. And that's when I finally came to the States. So I came to the US at a different stage than a lot of other people do. You know, like a lot of people will come to study and then maybe stay. And then I came as an older professional, which also gives me a different positionality because as an old woman, I can call things out maybe, right? So I moved to Raleigh, North Carolina, where I did my PhD. And then I spent almost a year at the D School at Stanford. And then I moved to Tulane University, where I am now. I'm literally now at Tulane University so that I could get stronger internet for this call. But, you know, I carry these places with me everywhere that I go and in the work that I do. So I grew up in Trinidad and Tobago in the 70s and 80s in a Black middle-class family with feminist and progressive, socially conscious parents. We talked about Black power. Well, we didn't talk about it so much, but we saw it. There were images of Blackness and, you know, so I grew up with that comfort in who I was and with parents who were active and interested in social justice. My parents were quiet activists, but they were activists nonetheless. They took us, you know, me, my sister, my brother, they took us to marches and political rallies and things like that. I mean, we would be sitting under the trees at the political rally, but we were there. We were brought up in this kind of environments that had a lot of love and happiness and, you know, comfort. I told you already that I moved to Brazil shortly after school. And I like to tell people this, I've been attached to like way too many universities in my life. I didn't finish every program that I did. I started stuff, I dropped out of stuff, I continued. So, you know, like if people ask, who do I identify with? I identify very strongly with actually a few of them. So UFPR, UFPR in English, that's where I did my undergrad. UWI, University of the West Indies in the Caribbean is where I worked for a long time. And then I did an MBA there as well. NC State University is where I did my PhD. So I consider myself part of the wolf pack. You know, if people are from any of these places, they could put this information into the chat, say hi, wolf pack, and hi, UFPA here. UFPA. And as I said, now I'm at Tulane in New Orleans. But I want to go back for a minute or a few seconds to this graduation photo in Brazil in 1997 or 1998. And even though it was so long ago, this experience of living in Brazil in the 90s laid the foundation for my design philosophy and design practice. I lived with sociology and anthropology students. They were my roommates. We would all have like lunch together in the university restaurant. And so I would meet all of these other people from social sciences. You know, most of my friends, I mean, I was friends with people in design, but I probably had even more friends from other places within the humanities. And I think that these people impacted my work a lot. My friends did. And then my friends' references also impacted me. So during my time at university, I knew about Paulo Freire. Even though I didn't actually read him until my PhD, I certainly knew who he was. I knew about Claude Levi-Strauss, Sigmund Freud. All of these people were people who came to dinner with us when we were having our conversations in the evening. So I sometimes say that I became an anthropologist and psychologist by osmosis through my association with my friends. And then eventually, when I did my PhD, I actually did do some courses in these areas. So I think that I'm very influenced by anthropology as well in the work that I do. So my interest in social justice and design has brought me here to Tulane, where I have the role of Associate Director of Design Thinking for Social Impact at, we have a long name, the Phyllis M. Taylor Center for Social Innovation and Design Thinking. I love this title that I have because I think that the job title has some accountability embedded into it. And I think that that has made the work kind of interested or made my mandate kind of interested. You know, how are we going to do work that is impactful? Which I found out over the last 2 years is actually a hard challenge, you know, and it does take longer than 2 years to create the kind of impact that we probably want, okay? But I like that we focus on social issues and social justice, and we consider the impact of what we do, particularly here in New Orleans. New Orleans is sometimes called the northernmost city, northernmost Caribbean city. So it's a good place for me to be because it feels very familiar, right? And then I think that New Orleans is also a good place to be because even though it is a city in the global north, it does have a lot of issues that reflect places in the global south. And so I have found ways of bringing in my experience from life and work in other parts of the world into the work that I do in New Orleans. So that's enough about my little origin story. And I'm now taking you down this little journey about my PhD research. And so I start off with this quote which I really heard when I was starting to do the research, where this person asked a board member from the school that I wanted to work with, says, "You want to make these children angry?" And I thought, So you're probably wondering, why did this board member have this kind of response, right? And it's that this board member was a little bit scared because I was proposing a curriculum for children at a rural school in Trinidad, a curriculum that would have made them, that would have made their critical consciousness grow, right? My work was rooted in the work of Paulo Coelho. So we would have been talking about issues every day, and then moving beyond that, moving from talk, identifying issues, and then moving from those issues that we identified into design. Okay. But what this person was afraid of was that these children would start to get so angry when they started to see issues within their village, within their school, when they started to talk about injustice, and I like to keep this phrase in mind, because to me, it just made me think about how sometimes we're worried about how people will react to something. We're worried about making people angry. We're more concerned with keeping them satisfied and happy, and not having them work towards change, right? So that's really what the issue was in this text. So I need to come back on script. I'm starting to go off script, right? So this was the title of my research: Teaching and Learning Design Thinking Through a Critical Lens at a Primary School in Trinidad and Tobago. And what I was trying to do, as I started to explain, was to see how could we build this critical curriculum for children that was based in design. I was trying to see how could we use design for things other than just making objects or making pretty things. How could we use the qualities that we get from design education to do other things, to create this empowering curriculum for children. I was using an emancipatory approach, which I'll talk about a little bit more. But I was trying to then create this empowering design-based education curriculum for these children they were fourth graders at the school. And so I just mentioned an emancipatory approach. And so I'm going to share with you some of my keywords that I talk about all the time. And today I gave a class about, I was a guest in a class about ethics. And when I Googled ethics before the class started, I had to see, well, okay, what are really ethics? Ethics are these guiding principles. And I, over the last few years, have created, in fact, like little manifestos and guiding principles to help me think about, okay, am I doing the work that I want to do? And so maybe these are my ethics, right? So these keywords, in fact, do follow me in the work that I do, right? So my personal keywords are emancipation, positionality, collaboration, and co-creation. So anybody who talks about me hears those words at some stage in the conversation. And I like this West African proverb that says, until the lion has his or her own storyteller, the hunter will always have the best part of the story. And so in the work that I'm doing, I'm asking myself, what is the lion's perspective? How can the lion tell the story? Or how can we support the lion to tell the story better? How can we find a perspective that is not normally told in the research? So all of this is how this emancipatory research, this emancipatory viewpoint comes through, where I'm not focusing on the dominant narrative. I'm focusing on the less dominant narrative, and I'm trying to get the people who are traditionally excluded and forgotten to be involved in telling their own, to tell their own stories, and then I'm just supporting that. So just like a little bit of an academic definition about emancipatory research, what is it? Emancipatory research aims to create emancipation and social justice, to correct the power imbalance in research design between privileged researchers and their research subjects from traditionally marginalized or oppressed groups, such as the economically disadvantaged and many other groups. And emancipatory research aims to shift power, redistribute power, share power. So again, well, this is another keyword that comes up in my research, right? And then David Dillon Thomas includes this Latin phrase. Oh my goodness, I'll probably botch it up, right? Butcher it. So nihil de nobis sine nobis, nothing without us, nothing about us without us. And that's a really emancipatory phrase where, or even for us, by us is another emancipatory phrase. And so these are views and perspectives that I bring in the work that I'm doing as well. And so emancipatory research, in this kind of work, we are analyzing power inequities. We are creating knowledge through a prism of cultural lenses. We know that knowledge is not only created by the elite researcher. We are interested in multiple truths, not just one truth. We know that knowledge is dialogic and dialectical. It is participatory and political. It's linked to social action, and it shifts power to those without or with less power. And I also have started to say that the work that I do is critical design thinking. And when I say this, this means that I'm questioning everything. And I'm pulling that criticality from a few different directions. So critical thinking, which is about many things, including questioning sources, ideas, assumptions, critical inquiry and critical theory, which are about doubting and questioning what has been taken for granted and demonstrating that we don't know what we think we know. Critical pedagogy, which is a way of teaching that is grounded in dialogue, situated learning, local situated learning and local learning, and encouraging students to see and examine power structures and to question the knowledge that is presented to them and to co-create knowledge with others. And finally, critique, which we do pretty well in art and design, where we learn to give others feedback on our work. And we spend time reflecting on this work to make it better. Okay, so this is what I do, where I'm really trying to question everything. Some days I'm like more than questioning things, I'm just burning things down and starting things over. But I am looking and seeing where do we need to change, and then I'm doing more than that. And I'm not the only person doing more than that. I'm saying, well, okay, where's the action? So we know where it needs to change, and let's act and change things. So in that research, this is a slightly illegible drawing, but I like to do this sometimes, right? So I created this design curriculum where I was looking at the principles of empowering education, where it needs to be problem posing, situated, multicultural, dialogic, de-socializing, democratic, researching, interdisciplinary, activist, participatory, and effective. And then I added it to something that I found called critical utopian action research, which is a form of action research that is rooted in these three questions. What's wrong? So there's this critique of the present. Where do we want to go? So that's the future, you know, where people are dreaming of what's the ideal future that they want. And then how will we get there? Which for me is a design question. You know, anytime we ask that how, you know, that means that we can act through design. And so I thought that critical utopian action research was just perfect for design. And that's then the base of the curriculum that I created for the children, and actually the base of a lot of the work that I still do today, about 3-4 years after finishing the PhD. I mentioned that my work was heavily influenced by Paulo Freire, who, you know, like in this quote, he says, no pedagogy which is truly liberating can remain distant from the oppressed by treating them as unfortunates and by presenting for their emulation models from their oppressors. And I think that that's something that we do very often in design, where we, not just in design, in social work, in so many fields. We look at people who we consider as, oh gosh, these poor people, these unfortunate people, you know, that we're trying to help. Um, and I think that Freya and other people from that line of maybe philosophy challenge us to look at doing this work in a different way. And so I encourage all designers to read Paulo Freire. Here is a little bit of a little glimpse of some of the papers that came out of that research. So this paper was called Introducing Critical Pedagogy Through Design Thinking to Primary School Students in Trinidad and Tobago. So almost the title. But you know, there are two little quotes in this poster where you could see the critical awareness was starting to form in the kids, where, you know, we would read the newspapers and then have the discussion and then do the design work. And one day, one of the children said, but this newspaper's there's so many international stories and there are no stories about Trinidad. So, you know, finally they were starting to see, oh, you know, even though this was their world, they were not represented in it. Okay. And then this other child was making models and then stopped and said, well, all of this stuff is from China. Can we make this stuff here? She was talking about modeling clay, which we call plasticine. And, you know, she says, but can't we make this here? Why does it have to be imported? And I think that that was like another little example of the critical consciousness being formed. Oh, actually, I can't monitor the chat, so it's good if someone else can, right? Because the chat is kind of missing for me. I'm gonna share like another paper from this other paper. I focus on empathy as well. And then finally, I focus on the way the children would think throughout the study. So enough about that PhD. Even though I continue to use that stuff, what I learned often, and I did not write enough. You know, I need to revisit that work and write a little bit more. But I want to share with you pretty quickly, you know, some of the tools and methods. This, I guess, is the designerliness in me. I enjoy creating games and Mad Libs and these artifacts to help get this critical message across. So I created, this was along the line when I was starting to think about things like manifestos and whatnot. I created this Mad Lib. I mean, this is not fantastic design, I suppose, but you know, it's like, it was to help keep me accountable. You know, I said, if I'm saying that I'm doing emancipatory work or critical work, I need these things to help me make sure I'm really on track. So this Mad Lib is making me commit to people's success and their empowerment, and empowerment in the real sense of the word empower, talking about power shifts, right? In a specific location or context or geographic space. And, you know, so if I did it and I put it up, it would help me. So this becomes like my personal manifesto. And at the end of a project, I could ask myself, well, did I really do this? You know, because as designers, we do a lot of work where sometimes we have to ask, okay, and who benefited from this? You know, I had to carry a certain amount of maybe designer's guilt for several years because I worked on a lot of projects with development agencies where at the end of it, I would look and think, I know I benefited as the consultant, but can I say really how the people in the project have benefited? So I've started to hold myself accountable on these kinds of projects as well. So here's another version of this. You know, my whatever kind of work, my design work shifts power. So this one is really about consciously making that shift from whichever group to whatever group by doing what, you know, because whenever we say that something is empowering, we should be able to say, well, okay, it is empowering because power shifted from person X to person Y. So one example of this, which I'll refer to as well in the slides as we move forward, is that Last summer, two residents of New Orleans reached out to me and asked me if they could dictate what my class would be about, right? You know, they said, okay, you guys normally want to do classes about XYZ. This is what we want you to talk about. You know, this is what we want your class to focus on. And so then that's a way of me shifting power to another group. So I could then, you know, feel comfortable that I did what I set out to do in that project. Here's another tool that I've created about positionality, because as you also at the start of this, I talk about positionality all the time. I think that nothing that we do is objective, and therefore we have to be able to talk about positionality, you know. And when I study design, we never talked about stuff like this, but the fact is that in the work that we do as designers, our positionality becomes important, and things like even being able to talk about race and gender and all of these elements of our identity, you know, all of this is important. And so this tool was a way of creating a way to be able to have some of these conversations in the design studio, as well as to see where there is heterogeneity and where there is homogeneity in the class. And then afterwards we could think about, or not just the class, it could be a design team. Then after we could think about what do we do about this when we've seen that, okay, everybody in this class is age 20 to 22, and we're interviewing people who are in their 50s. What does that mean? You know, does it mean that we have to practice more? We have to, you know, how are we going to really understand people's perspective when we are all so same? Okay. And so this is an example of the tool as it's completed in a group. Actually, for me, using this tool became even more interesting when we all went remote, and we could then use this tool through this whiteboarding app platform. You know, it became more interesting because people could actually put themselves in a more vulnerable space, you know, like if they turned off their cursor so that they could complete things anonymously. I found that yeah, using this remotely became a better experience, because then we could just look at it and see, oh, well, the majority of this class is heterosexual and female, right? And we could just talk about it without people having to make themselves like super vulnerable and say, well, okay, I filled in whatever bubble, you know, we could do it silently. Here's another tool that I created. This one I don't use so much because we're no longer in person. But I used to love this tool as a kind of warm-up activity. This was based on some resilience theory by Daniel. I think Daniel's last name is Albright, right? He's a professor at Northeastern, and he was talking about how your ability to survive in several contexts in New Orleans, I'm suddenly starting to get a lot of messages on my computer. Let me see if I can move some of these screens. Yes, your ability to survive like a natural disaster was surprisingly related to your social network. So not your income, not your intellectual level, nothing like that. It's like kind of who you know, because these people who knew you have to be able to come and check on you after the natural disaster has happened. You know, so like people in Texas today, you know, it's like, who do they know who are going to come and help them, right? So the idea of this tool was that I didn't want people to leave my design class without knowing their colleagues. So the idea of this tool is that every class I had to build in these activities so people could actually see their colleagues and be forced to talk with them. And so this was just something to get them to move around the class and make some connections. And so the designer's critical alphabet is another tool that I've created, but it's one of several tools. It is one that went viral, and so it became well known. And so I have a few slides to give you a little bit of the backstory of it. So this is the deck. This is the photograph on Etsy. And then now there is actually an app that somebody who I did not know, Marcelo Paiva, he's a designer in Miami. He just reached out to me and said, hey, can we make this information available to more people? You know, and that's really what the spirit of these cards, that was the spirit of the project, where he reached out, we created this app. The app can actually be translated into Portuguese and Spanish automatically. And actually, there's some students in Brazil right now who are fine tuning. They are going through the auto translate and cleaning it up. But you know, my friend Marcelo was interested in inclusive design, and you know, we sat down and we brainstormed a bit to see, well, okay, how can we get more people interested in this kind of concept of inclusivity? So now I'll give you a little bit of a backstory for this project, right? So I was co-teaching a design class, and our students, they chose the people that they were going to design for. And when they shared with the teaching team who their target users were, I I did not think that the user groups that they were going to design for were as diverse as I wanted them to be. Now, actually, I might have been wrong in my assessment, right? I don't really think I was, but I might have been, you know, and I have to remind you that, okay, I walk with my positionality. So I'm going to look at their range of people, you know, as a Black woman, you know, in my 40s, and I'm going to look at the people that I looked at the range of people that they said that they were going to design for, 6 people. And I just thought, okay, there are no Black people, there are no brown people, there are no, there was one woman in the group of 6 people. And for me, I just thought, okay, you know what? And I'm not saying that the students did the wrong thing, but I started to think about it now from my perspective as a professor and say, well, okay, so how am I going to make sure that there's enough diversity in the work that students choose to do, right? And then the other thing I was thinking is that, okay, even if they choose the people that they want to design for, how could I get them to shift or pivot their lenses every now and again? So actually, the cards started off as pivot cards, where I literally overnight after the class went and I created these 3 cards, the feminist theory, critical race theory, and through the eyes of the child, and came back into the class the next day. And as the students were working, I put a card on the table and they now had to adjust their lens to suit whatever random card that they had received. And so I continued to play with this idea for a few months. And then by the time the few months had passed, an alphabet had been created. Now you can see in the middle, this is like the second version of the prototype, where there were some other words. So, you know, some more words that you'd recognize from the alphabet were there. So linguistic hegemony is still in the alphabet. De-Westernization was the original prototype, and now it says Westernization. And then there were all of these A words, ageism and ableism. And, you know, the alphabet itself already has 2 A's. And so like there were a lot of words that didn't get in. I wasn't brave enough to put white privilege in as a card. And then queer theory ended up changing to heterosexism. And so there were changes over the along the way. And I keep saying that the alphabet was a prototype, and it was a prototype that I just made available to a lot of people, okay? And it continues to be a prototype. So like here, I'll show you that on the left, we have the 2019 version of this positionality card, and on the right, we have the 2020 version of the positionality card. And maybe some of you can already spot the difference. But if not, because it's a webinar and I can't really see if people are, see if people's faces to see. But what happened is that Sasha Costanza Chuck Sasha acquired a deck from me, and that made me think, oh, how exclusive, even though I was talking about inclusivity, the language that I had been using was really, oops, I moved the Zoom screen by accident. The language that I was using was also excluding people. So that's why there's a new version of that card today. And there are cards that have been added and actually none were taken out, but the deck has changed over time. And so one challenge that I make to people is to reconsider their designs through various lenses of exclusion. Literally, I gave a class this morning where we talked about that. And I asked students, okay, how was your design anti-racist, anti-sexist, anti-ableist, etc.? As an aside, I sometimes share, because I talk about how perfectionism gets in the way of our success. So I have two decks, actually. The messy prototype got out and went viral, and the other deck that is actually much more well designed. The questions are much more well curated. It has this beautiful artwork by Shao Chan Mei, and it never got out there. So, to students, other designers, I'll tell you, like, move beyond your own imposter syndrome, and just as you do your work, put out your messy prototypes and let people interact with it. So a lot of people use it. Frankly, I don't actually always know how people use it. I know how I use the deck. But people sometimes send me images of how they use it. So here are some I'm sorry, I'm just getting a notification where I am. But so there is, people use this in different contexts, and yeah, that's what this is about, right? It's this fun deck that I've just put out there. So I want to move on to this other section, pluriversal design classes. So I like to encourage people to decolonize their mind. I really change up my sources. I challenge myself to look for alternative sources. I ask people to look at their, as other professors make recommendations for reading lists and all of that, look at their reading list and see who's on the reading list, and see how they can decolonize and diversify their reading, because decoloniality, just to read off of this slide, this quote by Mignolo and Walsh, decoloniality is the ongoing serpentine movement towards possibilities of other modes of being, thinking, knowing, sensing, and living, okay? So this, I am a person from a former colony, Trinidad and Tobago. And so I bring then this decoloniality into the work that I'm doing, where I'm trying to see how can we promote other ways of living, being, knowing, sensing, etc. I talk about design thinking as curry, and that might be me trying to be a little bit decolonial in the work that I'm doing. And I then, when I use that reference, I encourage people to not think about the process, even though, yes, we do follow a process, but also to think about the ingredients. And the reason I talk about this, design thinking in this way is that curry is a dish that changes from family to family, right? And I want people to know, as they do their design work, there's no one recipe for good design. We're going to improvise that recipe and change it up over and over and over as we cook. We're going to change the recipe according to the audiences that we're working with. You know, if someone has an allergy to something, we're going to change up the ingredients. And so that's the way that I want people to think about design and design thinking as well. Another thing, way that I ground my work so that we aren't doing design for design's sake. So this is again to keep me accountable on a social level. You know, I use the sustainable development goals in the classes that I teach. So like right now, our class is actually focusing on sustainable development goals 2, zero hunger. And last semester, we were focusing on good health and well-being. And so here's an example of a design class that started with the Sustainable Development Goals, where this was when we responded to the call from the residents in New Orleans who said, you know what, actually, we want you guys to focus on health in New Orleans, given the impact of the pandemic. So we grounded the class in good health and well-being. I firmly believe that fixing problems does not lead to joy. So, you know, we don't, you know, I'm very intentional in this. This is actually something in my manifesto that I don't want us to only focus on people's pain and unhappiness and think, well, okay, how are we going to fix whatever pain point that they have? We do analyze things like pain points. But we also, as we interview people, we ask them about their joys, their happiness, the things that are important to them. You know, we're asking them about all of these things because we can use positive experiences as well in the solution. So the question that the students were working on last semester, how might we support New Orleanians to have access to good health and well-being? You know, after we did all of our interviews and we understood people's happiness and joy and things like that, we realized that our solutions had to also include culturally relevant solutions in New Orleans. So we had people create recipe sharing platforms because New Orleanians like good food. We had block parties around good health and well-being, which of course would have to happen in a post-COVID world, collective fitness sessions, community gardening. So, you know, life here is about community. And so we wanted to bring these into the solutions. So just here are a few examples of the students' solutions. So this was a solution about community gardening and, well, gardening on different levels. The students started off with like starter kits, home starter kits, and then had a bigger kit that you could use with your neighbors, and then an entire street kind of intervention to bring people together. Here's an example of the a recipe sharing platform. And finally, this fun idea of a food truck around good health and well-being. So I've started to kind of tiptoe towards public health because Tulane is a really good, Tulane has a good school of public health and a good medical school. And so last year, my colleague Alessandra Bazzano won an award. I have to say she won the award and I was tacked on to her award. I am riding on her coattails right now, but we got an award to experiment with using design research methods to promote emancipatory public health research, right? So I'm bringing that emancipatory philosophy now into a new area where we're trying to think, how can we use these creative design methods to get people to be able to say to public health organizations, well, this is the research that we want you to be focusing on. The same way the people in New Orleans were able to tell me which class they wanted me to do. As part of this research, we've started to create a series of workshops. This is called Design Thinking Gumbo. And you can see here that we have been experimenting with really a wide variety of research methods. So critical utopian action research, poetry for social change, cultural probes and design thinking, narratives on storytelling, and an introduction to virtual ethnography. And always the questions were about people's experience of the pandemic and then how to use these tools remotely, okay? How to use these research methods remotely. So like, here's an example of what we would have done in the critical utopian action research one, where we said to students, well, this is my favorite method, so that's why I talk about this one. You know, we said, well, we are in 2050, and we're telling people way back in 2020 about the world that they can look forward to. Thinking specifically about health, tell people back in 2020 about the amazing healthcare that they can expect. And then people brainstormed about this future that they really were looking forward to. And then they built, you know, in these circles, they were talking about what do we need to get to that future. And then, I mean, this was a design sprint, but we could have turned this into a much longer project afterwards. So a little bit of my passion projects. I'm the co-chair of the Pluriversal Design Special Interest Group um, of the Design Research Society with my friend Renata Marks Laytown, who is an instructor at OCAD University in Toronto. And our group is named after Designs for the Pluriverse by Arturo Escobar. And our philosophy is about bringing multiple perspectives to design, both design practice and design education. And we really focus on design practice outside of Europe and North America, even though we're both in North America. My friend is a Brazilian, and then I'm from the Caribbean. And then other people that we will reach out to in this network are from India, Asia, lots of South Americans, you know, because we have realized that design practice is very different in the global South. And so we have created this group around that. Last year, we held this pretty exciting conference called Pivot 2020, Designing a World of Many Centers, where we coached people who would normally not think of themselves as writers and researchers to write about their design work. And we published the proceedings. They're available online. We're currently working on a special issue for a journal. And then the next Pivot 2021 is going to be launched in the next few days. My own Pivot paper shared some examples of curriculum that I've been working with for several years. So this is an experiment that I keep doing, you know, experimenting with how can we do this curriculum differently. So here I was trying to imagine a curriculum for the most vulnerable economies in the world. And that was because I read an article where a very well-respected design researcher said, well, design is something that belongs to the most developed nations. And I said, well, okay, no, I am, I'm going to see what design education could look like for the least developed nations. So that's what this study is. You already saw this image of the curriculum that I did for the children. This image here is my pluriversal design syllabus, where I was imagining what are some of the courses in this pluriversal design syllabus, things like radical decoloniality, critical making, resilience and change, critical design thinking, understanding our worlds. And the last curriculum that I did in this series was about imagining a Pan-African design syllabus. And so what are some of these, what would be in this Pan-African design curriculum? Imagining Black futures, narrative and storytelling, serving my community, positionality matters. And these drawings that I do, these are thought exercises, but what they do is they help me crystallize what's really important to me, and I bring that actually into my real practice. So like I just taught a class this week about critical making, and critical making might have been somewhere in the Latin Latin American curriculum, you know. So every now and again, I can go back into these made up thought experiments and bring this into real practice. Another passion project that I've been facilitating here at Tulane is this project called Hello from the Pluriverse, where we had students who interview designers all over the world. And we are now in the process of releasing these interviews as podcasts. And so here is a designer from Colombia, Alfredo Gutierrez Bojero, someone who I have a lot of respect for. So for me, it was really exciting to bring in this Colombian researcher. Well, I didn't bring him in. I connected him to a student, and the student then had to research him, and then we created the podcast, and we can release this soon, you know. And so this is like a way of me, well, bringing my decoloniality back into the classroom and trying to see, well, how do we create a new design canon through new conversations? And here's another one. This is Tanya Marie Williams Rule. She's a designer in Trinidad and Tobago. And the students here who has never had the opportunity to speak with somebody from, well, Trinidad and Tobago other than their professor, then can connect with this designer in another place. And then what the students had to do is really try to understand how place and identity affected these designers and their work. And we've released them. We've started releasing them on podcasts. So you can find this one at taylortulane.edu if you dig around the website a little bit. So starting to wrap up, almost on the last slide. Just to end off, how can designers make their work a little bit more meaningful? These are some words that I've pulled out from one of my manifestos because they change. Promote an agenda for change and transformation, give participants more control of research agendas, be accountable to research participants. That shifts your work when you hold yourself accountable, or you think about, can I be accountable to the people that I'm working with? Focus on shifting existing power structures, favor long-term benefits over short-term goals. So these are some of the ways that I recommend that people make change. And then, you know, people need to have their own keywords and dig into their identity and see how they're going to bring that in, how they're going to be unapologetic about themselves. So this is my thing, you know, I am unapologetically decolonial, pluriversal, critical, emancipatory, equity-centered, and Black. And I bring that everywhere. So to end off, I want to end with this quote from Eric Liu that says, if you want to change the story that justifies power and privilege, you must have bold goals and specific steps. One must be in a space where one can ask, what is a better way to do this? And I think that this is what I'm asking every day. You know, how can I do this design work in a way that makes sense to me as a Black woman? How can I do this in a way that makes sense to other Black people, other people of color, people from South America, you know, to people, everyone who's normally forgotten in design? I'm trying to think, okay, how do we make this design work better for them? And so I'm going to end off there and see if we can entertain a few questions. So let's see, I'm going to stop sharing. All right. And end the show. And we could continue the conversation if people are still there.
Lots of folks are still there. Thank you so much for your talk. And to the attendees, you have a couple different ways that you can engage questions. You can raise your hand, and then Caitlin will unmute you so you can ask your question out loud, or you can put it in the chat and I will share it with Dr. Noel. Okay, there's a lot of messages already, so hang on.
Well, I see lots of thank yous, and I should say thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to chat with people.
So as long as I'm going to take this opportunity to ask a question while other folks are thinking about things. I actually
Yes.
have a flu, but I'm going to reduce it to one at the moment.
Uh-huh.
While your PhD in your research was really around young students, primary students, in regards to bringing in critical design thinking into their curriculum, I wonder what your thoughts are about bringing that into many different disciplines at more advanced learning, like at undergraduate programs or graduate programs, say in something like mathematics or biology.
So I guess there are many different ways I could answer this. The first thing is that I actually do use things or tools and techniques that I learned from working with the children. I do use them in my design class. One thing that I asked the children to do is, so I was talking with them about design and design thinking, and I never showed them any kind of like design thinking process or anything like that, right? But what I asked them to do, because this is critical pedagogy, is about the user kind of taking control of their own learning. I asked the children, I explained to them, well, I didn't explain to them. We talked about what design is. They explained to me what they understood design to be after I had gone through the discussion and whatnot. And it was interesting to see how they localized this idea of what is design. So, after I told them what is, no, I didn't tell them. That's a teacher-centric kind of way of talking. But, after we talked about it, they were able to point out, okay, yes, and the nail technician is a designer because XYZ. Or the person who makes the burglar bars, that's the wrought iron on the window, is a designer because they're responding to what people need, and then they are making this thing. And so the children really understood what design was. And for me, I learned a lot from that. I don't have to tell people what design is. We can talk about it and people get it, right? And then the other thing I did with the children is that every week I asked the children to create their own design thinking model. And then the following week, they would look back at what they did the last week and see what they would change. And that actually has turned into an assignment that I give my undergrad students every semester, where they have to reflect on design or design thinking and then see how they'll change a model. So, I do, in fact, use the theory that I learned for that PhD program. I'm still using it, even though I was working with children, I'm still using it now that I'm working with adults. And it's interesting that you asked about math, because I actually did this really exciting experiment with a math professor here at Tulane a week before we all went into lockdown, where we did a math design class. We sat down and we said, how do we run this math class like a sprint? And we gave the students a design problem. And then they had to use, they were learning something called ordinary differential equations. And so they had to use their equations to solve the problem and then give like a design pitch at the end of it. And, then the professor and I, she's Marie Dalle here at Tulane. And we sat down and then we reflected on, okay, what was this experience for the students? And, she was saying, what is really exciting for her is that different students got excited by the math class when we turned the math class into a design class. So like traditionally you have the super bright kids who are at the front of the room and whatnot. But when the math class became the design class, she said, students who were never engaged in class before, suddenly, they came to life and were involved in what was going on. And, so maybe I'm kind of going off tangent, but I think that I've learned a lot about learning that I'm now taking into other disciplines as well. And Tulane has been an exciting space because the pandemic has slowed us down, but we have been very experimental. There's also a Latin professor here at Tulane who turned her Latin class into a design class. Yeah, so it's been an exciting space. Yes.
Thank you. And that's exciting for me too, because I see so many potentials there. So there's some questions coming up. So one is in the chat. It's from Miguel Rodriguez.
I see it. Do I see it still? Yes.
How do you navigate creeping cynicism, if when you're experiencing it, during the design process with your teams?
So there's the cynicism from the team and the cynicism from the public, I suppose, you know, and I don't think I get the cynicism so much from the team. It's that sometimes we'll do work on a public level and people might be a little bit cynical about, I don't know, design or I do this utopia thing a lot. So they might be cynical about utopia, and I try to, Miguel, I don't know if this answer will satisfy you. I try to do things with a lot of humor. And so, you know, kind of counter the cynicism with action, with fun, with, you know, when we were doing in-person workshops, the workshops were really very relaxed, you know, with music in the background, and maybe we were putting on costumes and stuff like that. Now that we're remote, I mean, sometimes I'll put on a Snapchat filter, and this might sound trite, but it's that I have to bring people into this space where they could kind of leave the cynicism aside for a little bit and we can dream. So that's why I like this utopian action research, because it gives people a dream space. And I think that once I get people into that kind of dream space, we can move away from the cynicism. And, you know, we can move to a place where we're really thinking about solutions, right? But I have to get people on this journey where they think that they can imagine a world without the barriers that exist today. So like when I do a lot of work around race and diversity and stuff like that. When we try to design stuff that's in, let's say 2021, that's when the cynicism, I think, comes in, right? Because they're like, oh, nobody's going to do that. And there's too much whatever, you know, and, you know, people give all of these reasons why designs can't work. But when I tell them, okay, so now we're in 2072, we'll all be 100 and how much ever years old. And, you know, then they start to think, then they get a little bit more creative and they can leave the cynicism behind, because they can think, okay, well, by 2072, some things should have been dealt with, right? So we shouldn't have to be worried about certain things, and then they could get a little creative. So I don't know if that's a great answer, but that's one way I've been dealing with it, where I'm just trying to get people into a different space. You could say it's kind of like me trying to be a bit of a futurist, so that I can move people beyond the cynicism that they might have today.
Thank you. And I'm going to move to a question by Katie Scott. What does being accountable to research participants look like in your work?
So in the last project, I think that is the one where I've been like most successful recently with accountability, where I was, you know, like calling or checking on the research collaborators to say, well, okay, what do you think? Are you available for this meeting? Can you know, so like really the whole project was designed around them. And they were very involved. Now, this was an academic experience that I have to sometimes qualify this, you know, because people will ask, well, okay, which of the designs were implemented? And then I have to say, well, hold on. Actually, it was still an academic experience. It's still a very short semester. So none of the projects could go to completion, but the community partners were on the evaluation panel at the end of the class. They were the people who did most of maybe not mostly talking, but they did a lot of the talking, and they gave a lot of feedback. They were in, I think I counted maybe about 5 times throughout the semester that they were in class. And so that's one form of accountability. Now, as a designer, we're always trying to make things better. And so I am also critical of some of the things that maybe I've done where, like I think that last semester, what could I have done differently? Well, if some of the things that I wanted to do differently were outside of my control, because I wanted to be able to pay the participants more because it's real work that we're asking them to do. So I was kind of limited by the funding that was available. And ideally, I would then design the project in a different way where they're getting much more fees, fees as educators. Whereas sometimes we do this kind of work where we're saying, well, okay, the community partner is going to benefit from some imaginary thing, but actually they're teaching our students. And so, that's one thing that I would hold myself accountable to more if I did it again, where they are actually being paid as co-instructors at a different rate, because they did get paid, but I would negotiate a different kind of funding for them.
I think that's an ongoing problem
Yes.
that we struggle with, is that economy, that issue of economy.
Yes.
There's another question that just came in from Kyra. What are some of the strategies that we can use to start conversations in the design industry today about addressing underserved populations and viewing design projects and prospects through a different lens?
So these days I talk a lot about just learning to recognize exclusion. I talk about race a lot, but it's not the only, it's underserved populations don't only come from like specific racial groups. There are underserved populations in every, in so many different facets of life. So I just wrote an article. I don't think it has been published yet, but the article is about recognizing exclusion. And as designers, if we can learn to recognize exclusion, then we can lead these kinds of conversations in the organizations that we work, right? And that's how we serve people better, where it's not us targeting people and saying, well, okay, you're underserved and therefore I want to work with you. It's trying to see, well, okay, how are we, yeah, I guess I just kind of created a little loop that made me type myself up there. But it is looking at the work that we're doing and seeing how are we excluding people. One other way that I answer this question is that we also have to see how we can have greater diversity in our own social groups, because that will help us see the exclusion, because like I gave in my own example, when Sasha reached out again, then I was able to say, oops, I forgot this, I didn't deal with this well, right? Or, like if, I'm I'm like single parenting and studying and working. Well, I'm not studying now, I'm working. And, but like if my friends are really young people, they might see, oh, this is how we are excluding working mothers. And, like there was a point in my life when I couldn't socialize at all because my friends were always choosing these places that my son could not go, right? And so that becomes like another form of, let's say, exclusion. And so it happens on all of these levels. And so the strategies that we can use, one, we can learn to look for it, okay, and start to ask these questions. Then we could diversify our own groups, and then we could figure out how are we attracting more people to whatever processes that we are, so that we're getting many more voices into the work, which will make it better.
Thank you so much. We're coming to the end of our evening, so I'd like to thank you for coming to virtual PNCA and engaging our community and all the folks from outside of the community tonight that joined in. And also, I want to thank all the folks that came today. And I would say have a great evening, rest of your evening, and thank you.
Thank you. And I hope I could be there in person one day soon.
So do we.
Yes. Yes. Thank you. All right. Bye-bye.
Okay. I'm just going to wait till everybody steps off.
Okay.
Caitlin, are you still there?
Yes, I'm still here. I'm waiting till everyone leaves so that I can close it down afterwards and stop the live stream.
Yeah, I just want to have a moment with Lesley Ann.
Okay, do you want me to leave then or?
No, not at all.
Okay, okay.